The flight deck trembled beneath their feet, a wounded plain of scorched steel and jagged craters. Welding torches hissed in the morning air, sending showers of sparks across the twisted deck as 75 Seabees worked without pause patching holes that should have condemned the ship to months in dry dock. Standing amid the smoke and the smell of burned aviation fuel, Lieutenant Commander Herschel Smith watched silently. He knew every frame, every bulkhead, every fragile artery still running through this battered hull. What he faced was not just another damaged carrier. It was USS Enterprise CV-6, the only operational American flat-top left in the Pacific War. Lexington was gone, Yorktown was gone, Hornet had died only days earlier. And across the ocean, a Japanese fleet was preparing to seize Guadalcanal, knowing nothing stood between them and victory except this single, wounded ship. The men aboard Enterprise understood the impossible truth. If she failed now, the campaign would collapse. If she held, the entire naval battle of Guadalcanal could turn. In moments like this, history is not written by pristine warships or perfect plans. It is written by the vessels that refuse to die. So the question was simple and terrifying. How long could one damaged carrier stand against the weight of an empire? Before the battles around Guadalcanal ever erupted, the fate of USS Enterprise CV-6 had already begun to take shape in fire, steel, and discipline. Herschel Smith, the officer entrusted with keeping the ship alive, had spent months transforming her damage control teams into something rare, a crew that could fight the ship even when she was falling apart from within. They drilled in darkness, in rolling seas, in compartments thick with smoke. They rehearsed how flames spread through a carrier's heart, how metal buckled under blast waves, how water forced its way into places meant to stay dry. By the time Enterprise earned the name the Gray Ghost, every man aboard understood that survival was not luck. It was preparation. That preparation was tested long before the Pacific War reached its turning point. At the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, a single enemy bomb punched through multiple decks, choking the passageways with smoke and knocking out power across half the ship. Smith did not wait for reports. He ran toward the blast, feeling the ship tremble beneath his boots as men hauled the wounded clear and hoses roared to life. Hours later, Enterprise was battered, scorched, and still afloat. Then came Santa Cruz. 2 direct hits. 2 near misses. Fires raging near magazines. Hull plates buckled. Elevator jammed. 44 dead, 75 wounded. Any other carrier might have gone down, but Enterprise, scarred and shaking, limped away once more. Her survival was not inevitable. It was the result of men who refused to surrender to the chaos inside their own ship. By the time USS Enterprise CV-6 limped into Noumea after Santa Cruz, the ship looked more like a wounded survivor than the most decorated carrier of the Pacific War. Her forward elevator sat twisted in place. Her starboard hull bulged outward where shockwaves had warped the steel. Fuel seeped into the sea from ruptured tanks. No naval regulation would have permitted her to fight again, not for months. But regulations meant little when she was the last American carrier left. That was when 75 Seabees climbed aboard, men who usually built airstrips and roads, not life support for a crippled fleet carrier. Under Herschel Smith's direction, they turned the shattered flight deck into a workshop in constant motion. Welders stitched steel plates over gaping holes. Carpenters shaped wooden plugs to seal ruptures no blueprint had ever imagined. Mechanics lashed cables and pulleys to free the jammed elevator. Nothing they repaired was perfect. None of it was meant to last. But every patch bought Enterprise one more day to survive. And survival was all that mattered. When Captain Osborne Hardison received word that Japanese battleships were steaming toward Guadalcanal, he understood what that meant. Henderson Field would fall without air support. The Marines would be overrun. The campaign would collapse. So he turned to Smith and asked the only question that mattered. Can she fight? Smith knew the truth. One more hit in the wrong place, and the Gray Ghost would go down fast. But her engines worked. Her catapults worked. Her people were ready. She can fight, he said. At dawn, Enterprise sailed, still wounded, still leaking, still essential. When USS Enterprise CV-6 left Noumea at dawn, she carried more scars than certainty. Her patched flight deck still trembled under the weight of every landing. Welders worked beside armed aircraft. Cables rattled where true structural strength should have been. And yet, as she cut through open water toward Guadalcanal, one truth followed her like a shadow. Without this damaged carrier, the naval battle of Guadalcanal would be lost. On November 12th, the first test arrived. Lexington was gone. Yorktown was gone. Hornet had died only days earlier. And across the ocean, a Japanese fleet was preparing to seize Guadalcanal, knowing nothing stood between them and victory except this single, wounded ship. But that morning, As clouds thinned over the Solomon Sea, dive bombers from the Grey Ghost spotted her wake slicing across open water. The dauntless pilots rolled into their dives from 12,000 feet, each man descending toward a wall of anti-aircraft fire. They had practiced this attack profile for years, but never with so much at stake. Bombs fell in steady cadence. One struck beside the bridge, igniting gasoline stores. Another shattered machinery deep in the hull. Flames bloomed upward, black smoke twisting into the sky. By 1345, Kinugasa rolled to port, her engines dead, her structure failing. She disappeared beneath the waves with more than 500 of her crew. The pilots returned to USS Enterprise CV-6, some with holes in their wings, all bone-tired, and waited for the next call. They knew this was only the beginning. The Japanese had not yet played their strongest hand. Night was coming, and with it, battleships. That night, November 12th into the early hours of the 13th, the waters north of Guadalcanal erupted into chaos. American cruisers and destroyers collided in a point-blank brawl with the Japanese battleship He and her escorts. Searchlights slashed across the dark. Shells screamed over the waves. Some passed clean through hulls without exploding, fired at ranges so close their fuses never armed. By dawn, Hiei was a drifting wreck, and that was when aircraft from USS Enterprise CV-6 arrived. Dive bombers and torpedo planes, joined by Marine squadrons from Henderson Field, struck the crippled battleship again and again. Flames tore through her decks. Torpedoes ripped open her hull. A Japanese cruiser, Kinugasa, was retreating north after bombarding Henderson Field. She believed she had slipped away, out of reach of American aircraft. But the sea offered no pause. On November 14th, Enterprise pilots found a Japanese convoy of 11 transports. Packed with nearly 10,000 soldiers, the force meant to retake Guadalcanal. The attack was merciless. Thin-skinned cargo ships could not withstand 1,000-pound bombs or exploding fuel holds. Transports split apart. Others burned until they capsized. By day's end, 7 ships were gone, and thousands of troops drowned with their equipment. The survivors pressed on in darkness, trying to beach themselves at all costs. They believed the night might save them. They were wrong. A Japanese cruiser, Kinugasa, was retreating north after bombarding Henderson Field. She believed she had slipped away, out of reach of American aircraft. What followed was the most decisive night duel of the campaign. When Kirishima revealed her position firing at South Dakota, Washington answered with 16-inch guns at killing range. By sunrise, the second Japanese battleship in 3 days was gone, and the naval battle of Guadalcanal was effectively decided. In the early hours of November 15th, the battleship Kirishima led a new bombardment force south, only to be met by USS Washington and USS South Dakota. But Henderson Field still stood. The Marines still held the island, and the Japanese High Command, faced with the loss of 2 battleships, a heavy cruiser, and most of their reinforcement convoy, realized that the momentum of the Pacific War had shifted against them. The victory at Guadalcanal was not simply a tactical success. It was the collapse of Japan's final attempt to regain the initiative. By February 1943, they would evacuate the island entirely, conceding a strategic foothold that would anchor every American advance that followed. But for USS Enterprise CV-6, this triumph was not the beginning of her legend. It was the continuation of a story that had started long before Guadalcanal's waters ran red. She had been there at the very start. On December 7th, 1941, bad weather spared Enterprise from being inside Pearl Harbor at the moment of attack, but her aircraft flew into the chaos, some shot down by Japanese fighters, others by American flak thrown wildly at the sky. Days later, her pilots scored the first confirmed American sinking of a Japanese warship in World War II. She struck the Marshall Islands in February 1942. She escorted Hornet during the Doolittle raid in April. She helped lead the ambush at Midway, where the course of the war bent sharply in America's favor. Her presence at Guadalcanal was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of months of battles fought with dwindling resources and rising stakes. After Midway, USS Enterprise CV-6 carried the burden of a fleet that could not afford to lose her. In late 1942, she was often the only American carrier on the front lines, fighting in places where defeat meant surrendering whole regions of the Pacific. But as 1943 dawned, new warships began rolling out of American shipyards, and Enterprise's role evolved not to one of rest, but of relentless action. She led strikes across the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, smashing Japanese airfields, destroying shipping, and clearing the path for amphibious landings. At Truk, the Gibraltar of the Pacific, her aircraft tore into one of Japan's most heavily defended bases, sinking transports, cruisers, oilers, anything that tried to flee the lagoon. Through the Marianas Campaign, through the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey-Shoot Enterprise proved again why she was the most dangerous carrier afloat. In the early hours of November 15th, the battleship Kirishima led a new bombardment force south, only to be met by USS Washington and USS South Dakota. Her decks launched mission after mission with a precision earned through 2 years of nonstop combat. By late 1944, she had become something entirely new, the Navy's first operational night carrier. Her fighters hunted bombers in the dark. Her torpedo planes struck airfields while the rest of the fleet slept. Her air crews mastered a discipline few had ever attempted. Then came 1945, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, kamikaze attacks that turned the horizon into a field of falling stars. Enterprise absorbed multiple hits, her elevator blown apart, her decks pierced, her men wounded or killed. Yet every time she burned, she rose again. For 4 relentless years, the Gray Ghost fought wherever the Pacific War burned hottest. Her survival was no miracle. It was willpower, ingenuity, and the unbreakable resolve of the men who served aboard her. The survival of USS Enterprise CV-6 was more than a story of steel and fire. It revealed something deeper about the way nations wage war and how they understand power. In late 1942, the United States was not suffering from a lack of warships. Destroyers were sliding down the ways every week. Cruisers and battleships were entering service faster than Japan could track. But carriers were different. They required skilled labor, advanced machinery, and time America did not yet have. That scarcity made Enterprise the hinge on which the entire Pacific War threatened to turn. Every officer in the South Pacific knew it. The Japanese Admiralty knew it. The Marines clinging to Henderson Field knew it most of all. If Enterprise fell, no reinforcements would arrive, no fighters would contest Japanese bombers, and no dive bomber could strike the convoys heading south. One ship battered, leaking, stitched together with temporary welds became the backbone of an entire theater of war. Japan's perception of her only intensified that pressure. Tokyo declared Enterprise sunk 3 times in 10 months. Each time she reappeared in battle, it shook their confidence. Rumors spread through the Imperial Navy that the Americans had built multiple ships bearing the same name. Others insisted that U.S. damage control must be almost supernatural, far beyond anything in Japanese doctrine. They were not entirely wrong. American ship design emphasized compartmentalization, firefighting capability, and the ability to survive long enough for crews to act. Enterprise embodied that philosophy. But the ship's true strength came from its people. From Smith's damage control crews sealing compartments in darkness. From teenage pilots launching into storms of flak. From Seabees welding under enemy air attack. Their combined willpower created what enemies came to call the Gray Ghost, the ship that refused to die. Yet victory carried a quiet tragedy. When the guns of 1945 finally fell silent, America celebrated triumph but overlooked memory. Enterprise had earned more battle stars than any warship in U.S. history. She had outlasted fleets, saved campaigns, shaped strategy. And still, she was cut apart for scrap, not by enemy fire, but by post-war indifference and budget lines. Her loss changed the nation. It sparked preservation movements that would save ships like Intrepid, Hornet, Yorktown, and Lexington for future generations. But the ship that set the example did not survive to witness it. Yet victory carried a quiet tragedy. When the guns of 1945 finally fell silent, America celebrated triumph but overlooked memory. Enterprise had earned more battle stars than any warship in U.S. history. She had outlasted fleets, saved campaigns, shaped strategy. And still, she was cut apart for scrap, not by enemy fire, but by post-war indifference and budget lines. When the war finally ended, USS Enterprise CV-6 did not sail into a triumphant sunset. She did not become a museum ship, crowded with school children, veterans, and families who might have walked her decks in awe. Instead, the most decorated warship in American history slipped quietly into reserve, then into paperwork, and at last into the cutting torches of a scrapyard, a fate she had denied to every enemy that ever tried to sink her. There is a profound irony in that. A ship that survived Pearl Harbor, the Marshalls, Midway, Guadalcanal, the Marianas, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa could not survive peacetime. But the truth is that her steel was never her greatest legacy. Her legacy lives in the men who kept her alive, in the damage control parties who ran toward explosions instead of away from them, in the Seabees who welded a flight deck together while enemy aircraft circled overhead, in the pilots who took off with fuel tanks, half-patched and engines coughing because someone on the ground needed their help, in the captains who asked not whether the ship was perfect, but whether she could still fight. It lives in every carrier that followed. In the night squadrons, she pioneered, in the doctrines of firefighting, compartmentalization, and resilience that her crew perfected under fire. In the name Enterprise, carried forward by nuclear giants, and soon by CVN-80, ensuring that the spirit of the gray ghost will never vanish from the sea. And it lives in us, in those who choose to remember. Because the lesson of Enterprise is not simply that America once built a ship that refused to die. It is that ordinary men, given an impossible task, can hold the line when history demands it. It is that victory is often carried not by the newest or strongest vessel, but by the one held together by courage, ingenuity, and stubborn hope. The original Enterprise exists now only in photographs, fragments of steel, and the memories of the few who served aboard her. But as long as her story is told, as long as people remember what one damaged ship achieved in the vast Pacific, she has not been lost. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe for more untold history, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice helps keep these memories alive just as surely as those welders once kept a battered carrier in the fight.